Not violence, not shouting, not a punch thrown across a room, just a sentence. And yet that sentence would end a business, expose a system, and remind everyone watching what real power actually looks like. The restaurant was full that night, every table taken, plates clinking, conversations overlapping, and that familiar hum of comfort people trust too easily. The kind of place where nothing bad ever seems like it could happen, because nothing bad ever announces itself. At the front door, a man stepped inside. Some recognized him instantly. Some didn't, but everyone could feel it. Something about his presence was different. Calm, centered, unrushed. This wasn't someone looking for attention, it was Muhammad Ali. No cameras followed him. No entourage pushed through the crowd. Just a world-famous champion walking in like any other man, hoping for a meal, a seat, a moment of normalcy. He waited. A host approach, polite smile, professional tone, the kind people use when they think rules are on their side. Then came the request, quiet, measured, almost gentle. "Sir, you'll have to use the kitchen entrance." The words didn't echo, they didn't need to. Nearby conversation slowed. A fork paused mid-air. Someone laughed awkwardly, unsure if they had heard correctly. Others stared straight at their plates, suddenly very interested in their food. Ali didn't respond right away. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't ask to see a manager. He simply stood there absorbing the moment. Because humiliation doesn't always come wrapped in cruelty. Sometimes it arrives dressed as policy. Sometimes it's delivered politely, with a smile, as if that makes it easier to swallow. The power imbalance was clear. A business backed by rules. A man being told publicly where he was allowed to enter. The room held its breath. People expected anger. They expected a scene. They expected the boxer, the showman, the fighter. What they didn't expect was restraint. Because what Muhammad Ali chose to do next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. And it didn't make headlines that night. But it planted a seed. And by the time the dust settled, that restaurant would never open its doors the same way again. What Muhammad Ali did next didn't go viral that night, but it changed that restaurant forever. Inside the restaurant, everything felt ordinary, almost reassuringly so. Soft music played overhead. Plates moved from kitchen to table in steady rhythm. The smell of cooked food hung comfortably in the air, mixing with laughter and casual conversation. This was the kind of place people came to relax, to forget the outside world, to feel safe inside routine. Customers sat shoulder to shoulder. Couples leaned in close. Families talked over one another. Waiters moved quickly, practiced efficient, doing what they had done 100 times before. Nothing about the room suggested conflict, and that's what made it dangerous. When Muhammad Ali stepped inside, he didn't disrupt the flow. He didn't announce himself. He didn't demand special treatment. He dressed simply, blending in as much as a man of his stature could. To him, this wasn't a stage. It was just a restaurant. Ali wasn't there as a champion, not as a statement. He was there as a customer. Around him, reactions varied. A few people whispered, nudging one another with quiet excitement. Others glanced once, then looked away, more interested in keeping their night uninterrupted than acknowledging who stood nearby. The staff noticed too. They always did. But recognition didn't bring respect. It brought calculation. This was a time when segregation didn't always need signs. It lived in tone, in procedure, in the way things are done. Rules that had existed so long. No one thought to question who they were meant to control. To the restaurant, this night was just another shift, another crowd, another set of faces that would eat, pay, and leave. That sense of normalcy is what allowed the moment to unfold. Because injustice rarely enters loudly. It enters quietly, slipping into everyday routines until no one remembers questioning it. Ali stood calmly near the entrance, waiting to be seated like anyone else. He didn't rush. He didn't fidget. His posture wasn't defensive, it was patient. Around him, life continued uninterrupted, and that was the point. No alarms, no warning signs. Just a system working exactly as it was designed to. Moments like these matter because they show how easily dignity can be challenged when people feel comfortable, when a room is full, when no one expects trouble, when silence feels easier than speaking up. To everyone else, it was just another ordinary night out. But for Ali, this was about to become something else entirely. Because comfort, once exposed, has a way of collapsing fast. The moment didn't explode. It slipped in quietly. A man from management stepped forward, neatly dressed, posture firm, voice calm enough to sound reasonable. He didn't look angry. He didn't look embarrassed either. To him, this was routine. He glanced at Muhammad Ali, then spoke in a tone that suggested cooperation was expected. "Sir, if you'd like to dine here, you'll need to use the kitchen entrance." There it was, not shouted, not barked, just stated like a fact that didn't require discussion. For a split second, the restaurant didn't react. The words floated in the air, settling slowly as people processed what they had just heard. Then chairs creaked. Someone cleared their throat. A nearby table went quiet. Ali didn't move. He looked at the man, then briefly around the room. Faces avoided his eyes. A few people watched closely, curiosity mixing with discomfort. Others pretended nothing had happened, as if ignoring the moment could make it disappear. That was the cruelty of it. The request wasn't framed as an insult. It was framed as a rule, a procedure. Policy. Something that allowed the speaker to feel clean while placing the burden entirely on the man standing in front of him. Ali remained still. He had heard versions of this sentence before. Different words, same message. You can enter, just not like everyone else. You can be here, just not fully. The manager shifted his weight, mistaking silence for hesitation. It's just how we do things, he added, lowering his voice slightly, as if offering a favor. No trouble at all. That made it worse, because now the humiliation was wrapped in politeness. A woman at a nearby table frowned. A man beside her shook his head slightly, then looked away. No one spoke up. Not because they agreed, but because silence felt safer. Ali felt the eyes on him. Some expected anger, some expected a speech. Some expected him to walk out quietly and spare everyone the discomfort. What they didn't expect was how long he would let the moment breathe. He wasn't calculating revenge. He wasn't deciding whether to fight. He was measuring the room. The confidence of the manager came from something bigger than himself. It came from the belief that the room would support him, that the system would hold, that no one would challenge what had been normalized for so long. Ali finally spoke, but not yet. Instead, he took a slow breath, because this wasn't just about an entrance. This was about being told in front of strangers that respect had conditions. And once a line like that is drawn, there are only two choices. Accept it or refuse it in a way no one can ignore. The restaurant waited, so did history. Ali didn't answer right away. He stood there, breathing slow and even, letting the silence stretch longer than anyone expected. The manager shifted again, uncomfortable now, glancing briefly toward the dining room as if seeking reassurance. The room felt tighter, smaller, like everyone had been pulled into a moment they hadn't agreed to witness. Inside Ali's mind, this wasn't a simple decision. He knew exactly who he was in that room, a champion, a symbol, a man people loved to watch when he was loud, defiant, entertaining. But he also knew something else. If he reacted the way people expected, if he raised his voice, if he embarrassed the manager, if he turned this into a confrontation, it would be easy for them to dismiss him. He's angry. He's difficult. He's causing trouble. And the rule would survive. Ali had learned long ago that systems don't fear anger. They fear clarity. He thought about the kitchen entrance, the narrow hallway, the back door hidden from sight. The message behind it: you can be here, but don't let anyone see you arrive. That wasn't just about him. If he accepted it, the rule wouldn't change. It would tighten. Tomorrow, someone else would be guided to that same door. And the next day, and the day after that. Each time justified by how quietly it had been accepted before. Ali felt the eyes on him again. Some curious, some sympathetic, some impatient. He thought about walking out. That would be easy too. Dignified even. No scene, no confrontation. Just a quiet refusal that would leave the restaurant exactly as it was: unchallenged, unexposed, comfortable. But Ali didn't believe comfort was innocent. He had seen how silence protected injustice better than shouting ever could. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, not raised, not sharp, just clear. "No," he said. The word was simple, but it landed hard. The manager blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry." Ali met his eyes. "I won't use the kitchen entrance." A ripple moved through the room. Someone whispered. A chair scraped lightly against the floor. The manager tried again, lowering his voice as if reason could still save this. "Sir, I'm just doing my job. Those are the rules." Ali nodded slowly. "I understand," he replied. "Then I'm telling you I won't accept them." There was no anger in his tone, no challenge. Just a line drawn carefully, deliberately. For the first time, the manager hesitated, because this wasn't resistance he could dismiss. There was no threat to call security, no profanity, no spectacle. Just a refusal that forced him to confront what the rule actually meant. Ali continued, still steady. "I came here like anyone else. Through the front door. If I can't be seated the same way as everyone else, Then I won't be seated at all. The room held its breath. This wasn't defiance for attention. This was dignity refusing to negotiate. Ali felt the weight of the moment settle, not as pressure but as purpose. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was making something visible that had survived only by staying hidden. For years, people had been told to endure quietly, to accept small humiliations to avoid larger consequences. Ali understood that fear, but he also understood something deeper. Change doesn't begin when someone explodes. It begins when someone refuses, calmly, publicly, and without apology. The manager straightened, clearly realizing this was no longer a private exchange, and in that realization the balance of power began to shift. Not because Ali was famous, not because he was strong, but because Muhammad Ali had chosen the hardest option of all, to stand still and make the world respond. The manager exhaled sharply, the patience in his posture beginning to crack. He hadn't expected this, not the refusal, not the calm, and certainly not the eyes now fixed on him from every corner of the room. He glanced toward the hostess stand, then back at Muhammad Ali. "Sir," he said, his voice firmer now, "we have rules for a reason. I can't make exceptions." That word, exceptions, hung in the air. Ali didn't respond immediately. He didn't argue the policy. He didn't question the manager's authority. Instead, he looked past him, at the people seated at the tables behind. Men and women who had been eating, talking, laughing. "This isn't about exceptions," Ali said finally, his voice still level. "It's about respect." The manager's jaw tightened. "I'm asking you to cooperate so we can move on." Move on. As if nothing had happened. As if the request hadn't already revealed something ugly beneath the restaurant's polished surface. Ali shook his head slowly. "I'm not causing a problem," he replied. "I'm standing in front of it." A murmur spread through the room. At a table near the wall, a black couple exchanged a look. The woman pushed her chair back slightly, no longer pretending to eat. A man near the bar folded his arms, eyes locked on the exchange. The manager sensed the shift but pressed forward anyway. "If you refuse," he said, "we won't be able to serve you." Ali nodded. "Then I won't eat here." The simplicity of the response startled him. No bargaining, no compromise, no retreat. The manager raised his voice just enough to reassert control. "This establishment reserves the right." Ali cut him off gently. "And I reserve the right to leave with my dignity." Silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. A chair scraped loudly against the floor. A man stood up from his table, hesitant at first, then steady. He placed his napkin down, untouched food still in front of him. "If he doesn't get served," the man said quietly. "Neither do I." The room froze. Another chair moved, then another. A woman near the window stood, gathering her purse. "I'm not eating here either," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. The manager's eyes widened. This was no longer one man refusing a rule. It was the room questioning it. Ali hadn't asked anyone to stand. He hadn't raised a fist or made a speech. He had simply refused to disappear quietly, and in doing so, he had made space for others to refuse too. The manager tried to regain control. "Please everyone, let's stay calm." But calm had already taken a new shape. It looked like people pushing back chairs. It sounded like murmurs turning into statements. It felt like authority slipping. A waiter paused mid-step, tray in hand, unsure where to go. The hostess stared at the floor. The front door opened as one customer walked out, then another followed. Ali watched silently. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about a system collapsing under the weight of being seen. The manager stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sir, we can talk about this privately." Ali met his eyes. "You made it public?" he said. "I'm just responding." That was the moment the manager understood. There would be no quiet resolution, no backroom compromise, no way to reset the night. Because rules enforced in public have consequences in public. The restaurant buzzed with tension now, not anger, but awakening. People were no longer just witnesses, they were participants. And without raising his voice or lifting a hand, Muhammad Ali had done something far more dangerous than a confrontation. He had shifted the crowd. And once a crowd moves, authority is never the same again. The front door closed behind the last customer with a soft click. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting followed. No plates shattered, just the sound of absence. The restaurant felt suddenly hollow, like a room that had lost its purpose. Half-finished meals sat untouched. Chairs stood crooked where people had risen too quickly to think about politeness. The hum of conversation, once constant, was gone. The manager stood frozen, staring at what remained. A business that had been full minutes earlier now felt exposed, stripped of the comfort it relied on. Rules were supposed to keep order. Tonight, they had done the opposite. Ali hadn't said another word. He had waited until the room made its choice, then turned calmly toward the door. No triumph. No lingering look back. Just a quiet exit through the same front entrance he had used to walk in. That mattered, because it sent a message no argument could. Outside, the night air felt heavier. A few people gathered on the sidewalk speaking in low voices. Some recognized him now, not just as a champion, but as the man who hadn't bowed when it would have been easier to do so. By the next morning, the story had spread. Not through headlines, not through breaking news, through people. Someone told a friend. That friend told a neighbor. Soon the entire community knew exactly what had happened, and exactly where. Word moved fast when dignity was involved. The restaurant tried to carry on like nothing had changed. The doors opened the next day. The tables were set. The menu remained the same, but something was different. Customers hesitated before walking in. Some turned around. Others asked questions the staff wasn't prepared to answer. Why had people walked out? Why had a man been told to use a different entrance? Management offered explanations. Carefully worded, vague. But explanations only work when people want to believe them. And fewer people did. Protests didn't arrive immediately. They didn't need to. The real damage came from awareness, from the quiet decision, repeated again and again, not to support a place that had exposed its values so publicly. Revenue dropped. Staff hours were cut. Whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into pressure. The manager who had spoken so calmly that night now found himself defending a rule no one wanted to stand behind. What had once felt like authority now felt like liability. Eventually, the doors closed. No announcement, no apology, just a sign that never came down. People would later say the restaurant closed because of bad business decisions, rising costs, poor timing. But those who knew the story understood the truth. It didn't close because of one man. It closed because one moment made everyone see the cost of silence. Muhammad Ali never claimed credit. He didn't give interviews about it. He didn't frame it as a victory. To him, it wasn't an act of defiance, it was an act of self-respect. And self-respect doesn't require applause. Years later, people would still talk about that night, not because of what was said to him, but because of what he refused to accept. He had shown something rare. That power doesn't always look like force. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like standing still long enough for others to find their courage. The restaurant became a lesson whispered through generations. Rules don't collapse when they're attacked. They collapse when they're exposed, and that exposure began the moment Muhammad Ali chose dignity over dinner, principle over comfort, and silence over rage. In the end, no punches were thrown, but something far more permanent was broken. A system that relied on people looking away finally found itself unable to hide. Years passed, but the story didn't fade. It lingered, not as gossip, not as rumor, but as a quiet reference point. A moment people returned to when they needed to remember how change actually begins. No fists. No shouting. Just one man refusing to shrink. The restaurant itself became an empty shell in memory. People struggled to recall its menu, its decor, even its exact location. But everyone remembered why it closed. Because places are remembered less for what they serve, and more for what they stand for. For Muhammad Ali, that night was never about punishment or revenge. He didn't celebrate the fallout. He didn't frame himself as a hero. In fact, when the story came up later, he spoke about it simply, as a choice. A choice not to enter through a door meant to make him feel smaller. A choice not to accept comfort in exchange for dignity. A choice to let others decide what kind of world they wanted to support. That was the real power of the moment. Ali understood something most people miss. Systems don't survive because they are strong. They survive because people cooperate with them quietly. And the most dangerous thing you can do to an unjust system is stop cooperating, not dramatically, not violently, but publicly, calmly, and without apology. The people who witnessed that night carried it with them. Some told their children. Some told their coworkers. Some remembered it silently the next time they were asked to accept something that felt wrong but convenient. That's how legacy works. It doesn't announce itself, it echoes. Ali's refusal gave others permission, not to fight but to stand, to pause, to question rules that relied on obedience more than fairness. And that's why the story outgrew the building it started in. The manager went on with his life. The business disappeared. But the lesson remained, passed from voice to voice like a warning and a guide at the same time. Because it proved something uncomfortable and undeniable. You don't need authority to challenge authority. You don't need numbers to start a movement. You don't even need words, just the courage to say no, when yes would cost you yourself. Ali didn't raise his voice that night. He didn't need to. His silence spoke for everyone who had ever been told to wait their turn, use the back door, lower their expectations, or be grateful for less. And by choosing restraint over reaction, he revealed a deeper truth. Anger can be dismissed, violence can be condemned, but dignity, clearly exercised in public, forces the world to look at itself. That's why the restaurant closed. Not because it was attacked, but because it was seen. And once something unjust is fully seen, it can't survive the same way again. This story isn't about the past. It's about the moments we face every day, small choices, quiet humiliations, subtle pressures to accept what shouldn't be normal. Ali's response reminds us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands still. More powerful stories like this are coming, stories about moments that didn't make headlines, but changed lives all the same. If there was a part of this story that stayed with you, share which moment hit the hardest. Your feedback helps shape what we tell next. Because the more we understand these moments, the better prepared we are when it's our turn to choose.